Welcome to Hudson RPO's podcast on racial equality and diversity. Hear from Hudson RPO leaders as they encourage organizations to just start on their D&I journey.
Welcome back to Just Start. I'm joined as always by my colleagues Gary Jones and Casey Butler. Hey guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So we don't have a guest star today. We're gonna do things a little.
We have us.
You have
So
us. You got the family. You got the all-stars.
we're B-listers. We're B-listers. So
Well, the B-listers are gonna pull out a list today. We're gonna try a little something different. So we were actually chatting in a post-production discussion last time about just some terms that have been cloying at us. Some of them are terms that are sort of in the zeitgeist. Some of them are terms that are used in the DEI space specifically, and all of them we think for various reasons are terrible. So we're going to tell you why. So let's jump right in. This one's been around for a bit, and it's not really used in DEI necessarily, but you hear it all the time. And then it is a favorite of my friend Gary Jones. It is reverse discrimination. Tell us about it, Gary.
reverse discrimination. Have you ever heard of reverse murder or reverse theft or reverse rudeness? It's really a term that has aggravated me for a long period of time because discrimination is discrimination no matter what source it comes from. So when you say reverse discrimination, you do exactly what we're trying to avoid here, and we're looking at specifically what group is discriminating against what group, right? And so it further divides, right? So reverse discrimination, just for summary for folks who may have not have heard it, I'm sure that everyone has heard it at one point in time or another, is it's typically reverse discrimination is a minority group discriminating against a majority group, right? So typically Black discriminating against whites, and so forth, for an example, right? And to me, it's once you reverse something, right, it doesn't exist anymore. So reverse discrimination is really what we're trying to achieve, right? It's not necessarily a term that I think is relevant or it's appropriately placed, right? Because if I discriminate against someone, it doesn't matter who it is, where it's coming from, the victim, it's the same. Discrimination is the same. I don't know what your thoughts about this, but I can't stand that term, reverse discrimination. It just should be just discrimination across the board.
Well, I think it also implies that the discrimination is like going in the wrong direction. Like,
Yeah,
whoa, that's the wrong way to put this discrimination.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm supposed to do that to you, not you to me. That's not right. So it's the sense that like, well, that's not how discrimination works.
That's correct.
That's part of the issue for me is, it's implying that it's upsetting the power dynamics, and that's part of what's bad about it, is it's going in the wrong direction, and that the right direction to go in is towards historically marginalized people, and not towards the people doing the marginalizing.
It should go, exactly. Discrimination should go this way, right? Don't reverse it, right? No, that's a great point, Jeremiah. Great point.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that. I think it's just you use a word, Jeremiah, power. It's about power. I think using that term I hope when our viewers get this perspective hope you, our viewers, when you get this perspective, you think twice about using the terminology, because I think it does give a lot of power to one group over the other, versus just everything together as discrimination, no matter which direction it goes.
All right.
Or who is being discriminated against.
Well, I think we've taken that term, put it down, flipped it, and reversed it, and let's move on to the next.
Everyone put it to reverse rest. Put it to rest. No more reverse discrimination. It's just discrimination. We have enough problems with discrimination on its own to give it even more power, to your point, Casey. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
So let's talk about microaggressions. And I'll leave this one off. So, for people who aren't familiar with the concept, these are, little things that might be said or done towards a historically marginalized group that signal that, they're othered in some way, or it's that sort of glancing wound that, is in theory unintentional, but has the effect of really activating that sense of discrimination for the target. So As an example, Casey, I'm sure you've been told in your career that you need to smile more, or like maybe if you're a woman in an office context and you've been assigned the note taker or the person who, gets the beverages or cleans up after the meeting. And Gary, you've spoken on this podcast quite eloquently to the experience of those seemingly offhanded remarks about like, oh, hey, I didn't know you were Black because of your name or your voice. And those, to me, like, those are the things that DEI calls microaggressions that I just call aggressions. Like, because, Gary, again, you spoke at length and quite eloquently about like how deeply that does in fact wound. So who is it micro to? The fact that it is brief doesn't make the impact of it any less for the person who receives it. So calling it a microaggression again is diminishing what that means and sort of giving a pass to the person who's performing the aggressive behavior, and it doesn't take into account how that actually affects the person who's receiving that behavior.
Yeah, I think I was just going to add to that. It's not a micro impact on the person. So
Right.
how do you call it a microaggression if it doesn't cause a micro impact?
Right.
I think it's the same impact. So I agree with you, Jeremiah. I think just the whole term micro is lessening it.
Absolutely.
And then maybe makes people feel, well, it's, it's okay. It was just, that people slough it off as, oh, I was just kidding. And that doesn't make it feel any better, I would imagine, by someone saying I was just kidding, and, don't take it too personal, or, it doesn't make it feel any better. So I think aggressions are aggressions, and just because it takes you only 2 seconds to say it doesn't mean it's micro.
Right. And you're right. And the individuals that are, performing these microaggressions, right? They minimize it as soon as they see the word micro, right?
Yeah.
Whether it be subconscious or conscious, right? I would even do that, right? If if I had a little micro problem of showing up somewhere on time, it's just a micro problem, and I can actually fix that later. I have other macro things. I have other things, right? With the word micro not in front of it that I can actually improve. The microaggression, everyone does it. It's just something that's a little bit, if everything is right, then I can actually concentrate on, fixing that. And I think you're right. Using that word micro does minimize that all the way around.
I think one of the things that was interesting as we were talking about this, as you said, Jeremiah, post-production, was around when you have a microaggression, or what people are terming microaggression, we'll just say aggression against you, what do you do? Like, what should you do? Or if you're seeing someone using aggressive terms and being aggressive against someone, what should you do as an action? And I think we had kind of talked about, standing up, not being a bystander. But talking to somebody, if you see that this is something that they're doing, and calling it out, and saying, this is how it made me feel. I can't speak for the other person that it was against if you're a bystander, but this is how it made me feel. And maybe you just want to, think about, how your words are having impact on others.
Yep. Agreed. Because again, like, it's not the kind of thing that you can let slide, because even if we do assume that these things are small, that they're micro, there's that phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. And death by 1,000 cuts versus death by a stab wound is still death. So
we're talking a lot about murder today. This is like gory. This should have been our Halloween episode, guys.
This should have been our October episode.
That's right.
But yeah, I think with that we can say, like, don't diminish discriminatory behavior by calling it a microaggression. Call it what it is, which is discrimination, unacceptable, and intervene accordingly.
Agreed.
So let's talk about another term, and to tell on ourselves, I'm not sure that we haven't used this term in a podcast before. So, and I, for myself, and maybe I'm just projecting this onto you, I can say that I have used this term, and it is something that I am acting with intention to stop using, because it is a term that gets used in DEI contexts a lot, which is diverse candidates. And I don't know, am I a diverse candidate? Casey, are you a diverse candidate? Gary, are you a diverse candidate? What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
It was it was so eye-opening to me, Jeremiah, about this because Jeremiah had brought this to us as a term that, you know, to talk about, and it was really eye-opening for me because I do use the term a lot, and in Canada, you know, one of our diverse groups we refer to as visible minorities. And so it really opened my eyes to the fact that we were lessening everybody's individuality by putting everybody together in one bucket. And it's really diverse or white, really. I mean, that just, you know, so we're putting everybody here, and then the other category is white. And it just was completely eye-opening to me when we were talking about this pre-show. So definitely something I'm going to be thinking about as we move forward and are using this term, and when, you know, when it's appropriate and when we should be thinking about making sure we're thinking about individuals.
Yeah, I think that, you know, to Jeremiah's point, when he asked, you know, Casey, are you diverse? Jeremiah, are you we all are diverse, right? That's what makes diversity. So when you label someone as a diverse candidate, it's really kind of, you know, it's overkill, right? You know, but when we talk about diversity, that's different, right? When we talk about diversity in terms of the term, in terms of the initiative, in terms of, you know, practice and things of the nature, it's a little different. But when we actually refer to, which I've done before, you know, is this person a diverse candidate? Well, of course they're a diverse candidate, right? Because diversity is everyone, right? So you're right. It's just really kind of a redundant overuse of the word diverse, I think, in this statement. It's probably going to be one of the, at least for me, one of the toughest things for me to change in language because I've been so programmed to talk in that type of vernacular. And, you know, I'm going to definitely make sure that there's a conscious effort not to do that, right? Because everyone is a diverse candidate.
But the other thing I think of too is I think it's a term people feel like they can use without saying the wrong thing, without labeling people incorrectly.
Yeah.
Right? You know, what is the appropriate term? Can I say Black? Can I say African American? If I just say diverse, I'm not going to offend anybody. But that's not what we're hearing necessarily. Some candidates, you know, don't want to be, you know, labeled diverse. They want to be labeled, not labeled. They don't want to be labeled, period. So I thought that was, you know, that's something that for me really made me think about it.
Yeah, look, and I think the other thing is you just lose the opportunity to really identify where you are lacking and where you need, you know, diversity is only diversity, to Gary's point, insofar as it creates diversity within the team. So if you are a team of 100% women, adding another woman may not significantly enhance the diversity of your team.
Right.
If you are a team of 100% men, it absolutely will. So it sort of absolves you from having to really do that self-examination to determine where do you actually need to situate, you know, where do you have a gap and where do you need to plug that gap and where do you need to identify which communities you need to focus on to build the diversity of your team.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
All right, we got one last hit in the hit parade, and that is best practices. And best practices is a term that like corporate America just loves to use for all sorts of things, but particularly in the space of, you know, diversity. If you're looking at building your diversity strategy and you're starting from scratch, you're like, let's look at best practices. What are the best practices out there? Go find us some best practices, and then we'll be the best. Casey, what are your thoughts on this approach?
Well, just like you said about diverse, I think, you know, best practice is something we may have actually said on the podcast. So for those of you who are watching and have watched previous podcasts, you can totally call us out on this because I am definitely changing my lingo when it refers to best practices. I won't be using that term anymore. I think I don't think any company has got this figured out 100%, or else we'd all be copying their best practices. So I think moving forward, a better term is really around better practices, to do better, not necessarily to do the best yet, because there is not an established best practice. But so for me, I think moving forward, I'm really going to refer to it more as a better practice. Let's do better than we did before. And let's look at companies that are doing this really well, and let's, you know, see what practices they put in place, but they're not necessarily the best practice.
Yeah, and the term I'm going to use right approach. What is the right approach? Because there's not one size fits all, right? So, you know, some companies have different issues regarding diversity.
Agreed.
other companies, or even equity and inclusion for that matter, right?
Mhm.
So you can look at two different companies who have different issues within the same realm of DEI, right? And so not necessarily what one company is doing is going to be the fit for the other company. So it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily make sense, and they could be doing two different things and still be very successful in what
Absolutely.
they're doing, right? So the right approach is, I think,
I
is
like
what
that.
I'm going to actually start incorporating as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, because there's so much customization, right, with your organization and what might be happening within those walls. So
Right. No, I like that.
And I think just the other thing to add to this is like, even if in a universe where there are things that are best, right? Things that are like, well, that's the pinnacle, that's the greatest thing that we can do. That might be true for today, but it's not gonna be true for tomorrow. So calling it best absolves you from the responsibility of constantly examining, is this working? Is there a better way of doing this? And I think, unconscious bias is a good example of this, right? Like, unconscious bias is really impactful training. Everyone who goes through it like feels really like they've learned, that it's eye-opening for them. They have these aha moments. And so companies just started doing this across the board. It became a best practice. But there really wasn't a critical examination of like, what happens after that? Do people have the ability? Are they trained on how to apply those learnings to how they move forward? And like, that piece was missing, where if those companies hadn't just assumed that they were doing the hot thing, the thing that was going to solve diversity for them, and actually continued to monitor, is there a way of doing this better, they might have gotten to a better result faster.
Mhm.
So if you think what you're doing is the best, you're wrong. It's not. It can always be better.
You can always be better. Well, like
So
it's
figure out what the
thing.
right approach is.
Yeah, exactly. No one's perfect, right? So, you should be striving for greater. If you are already sort of further along your diversity journey as an organization, you should be continuing to strive to get even better.
yeah.
Right.
So yeah, no, I like
Things
that.
change, needs change.
Mhm.
The culture changes, and you need
Mhm.
to be responsive to that. So nothing stays best for very long,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
except for this group.
Except
That's
for
right.
this.
That's right. This is
I think you
We're
just
the
stepped on my
pinnacle.
transition, Gary, but go ahead and say what you were going to say.
no,
And then I want
that-
something to add something too,
listen,
Joe,
that
or I'm
was
gonna
important.
wreck it.
This
That
is
was
a mess,
important.
you guys, but let's do this thing. Casey, what you
Go ahead,
got?
Gary. We'll let Gary go first. Go ahead, Gary.
You want me to go? No, I'll let you
Yeah,
go first.
okay. I was just gonna ask
Terrific.
our audience, actually, we would love to hear from you,
Yes.
as to what some of the terms that you hear used on a regular basis that are kind of a pet peeve to you, or you feel differently about them. We would love to hear from you and engage with us on those terms, so that maybe we can have a follow-up show and talk about them, but at least we can hear from you and comment. Love to hear what terms, kind of are on your list.
Yeah, and even terms that you're using,
Yeah.
right? That it's great to hear like feedback from a lot of people in how they're communicating their diversity, equity, inclusion efforts and initiatives. It's great to hear from that, so we can
Mhm.
glean right approaches and right fits, right, for
Mhm.
things that we're doing. But listen, we jest a little bit, but these words are powerful. Words are so powerful when it comes to anything, really, but certainly diversity, equity, inclusion, right? And we've all experienced it. We've given examples, Casey and Jeremiah and myself, regarding how words have made us feel at one point in time or another. And so even though there is kind of a jest to this, there is some importance to take away from it in terms of these particular terms and how overused they may be or how inaccurate in their perception. So we appreciate you taking time to listen to that piece of it, but we really want to nail home that we're going to change some of the misperception of vocabulary and the way things are communicated, throughout our podcast. So
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you both. The right approach is definitely to continue this dialogue with the two of you. Thank you for your insights today. As always, this was fun. I hope our viewers don't judge us too harshly for the awkward transition at the end, but it's been a great time as always. Gary and Casey, thank you so much for joining us, and do leave your comments around what else you think we should be exploring, and other terms and topics, to Casey's point, that you think are used or overused, or would want us to talk about.
Mhm.
That's all for today, folks.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
thank you
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Have a great weekend.
See you.
To speak with any of today's participants about your Just Start journey, email juststart@hudsonrpo.com.